When James Walker asked Elon Musk for a single dollar outside a Tesla showroom in Austin, he wasn't just another homeless man looking for spare change. He was a brilliant software engineer who had lost everything in a tech scandal, carrying a stolen laptop filled with code that would change both their lives forever. But he didn't know that his simple request would lead to an earth-shattering discovery. Tesla had been secretly searching for him for 5 years, ever since he anonymously posted a piece of security code that saved the company millions. All they had was his code. No name, no way to find him, until today. What happened next would not only transform James's life from sleeping behind a library to becoming Tesla's head of security, but would also expose a corporate conspiracy that had destroyed his career, reunite him with his teenage daughter, and prove that sometimes asking for a dollar can be worth $1 million. This is the story of how a homeless man's request for spare change turned into one of the most extraordinary second chances in tech history. James Walker's fingers were numb from the cold as he reached into another recycling bin. The early morning Austin air had a bite to it. Unusual for Texas, but perfect for keeping most people inside. That's exactly how James liked it. Fewer people meant fewer stares. "Come on, give me something good today," he whispered, his breath visible in the dim light. His fingers touched aluminum, and he smiled. Cans were his bread and butter, 5 cents each at the recycling center. Not much, but enough to maybe get something warm to eat later. A sleek Tesla model glided past him, silent as a ghost. James watched it disappear around the corner, remembering when he used to dream about owning one. That was before everything fell apart, before the tech crash took everything he had worked for. 3 years ago, he had been James Walker, senior software engineer at Tech Front Solutions. Now he was just James, the quiet homeless man who slept behind the Line Library and knew every recycling bin route in downtown Austin. He pulled his thin jacket tighter, feeling the laptop pressed against his chest. The laptop was his most prized possession, stolen from a coffee shop last year. He hated that he had become a thief, but he needed it more than its original owner. It was his only way to keep his coding skills sharp, using free Wi-Fi at the library to practice on coding challenge websites. "Morning, James," called out Mrs. Jacob from her small convenience store. She was one of the few people who still treated him like a human being. "I have some day-old sandwiches if you want them." "Thanks, Mrs. Jacob, but I'm okay today." He wasn't, but his pride was the last thing he had left. He had made enough from yesterday's cans to buy a small coffee, which meant he could sit in McDonald's for an hour and warm up. As he walked down 6th Street, James caught his reflection in a store window. His beard was graying now, his face weathered from sleeping rough, but his eyes were still sharp. Those eyes had once stared at screens for 14 hours straight, debugging complex security protocols. Now they searched for cans and loose change. He remembered the day it all crashed down. TechFront had been riding high on cryptocurrency security solutions until they weren't. The market crashed, taking their clients' money with it. Then came the lawsuits, the layoffs, and the domino effect of missed mortgage payments. His savings disappeared into legal fees, trying to prove he wasn't responsible for the security breach that had started it all. James shook off the memories and focused on his morning routine. He had 6 prime spots to check before the street cleaners came through. The first was behind the trendy coffee shops on Congress Avenue, where tech workers tossed their energy drink cans without a second thought. As he worked, he listened to the city wake up. The click of heels on sidewalks, the whoosh of car doors, the chatter of people heading to their jobs, sounds from a world he used to belong to. He had a special trick for staying invisible. Look busy, keep moving, don't make eye contact. People preferred to pretend he didn't exist anyway. His bag was getting heavy with cans when he heard excited voices from around the corner. A crowd was gathering outside the Tesla showroom, phones held high, waiting for something or someone. "He's really coming," the store manager confirmed. "Elon never visits the Austin stores." James froze. His heart started beating faster, though he wasn't sure why. He should move on. Crowds meant security guards, and security guards meant being shooed away. But something kept him rooted to the spot. A memory flashed through his mind. 5 years ago, he had written a piece of code late one night. something elegant and simple that solved a complex security problem. He had posted it anonymously on a programming forum, too tired to even take credit. The next day, he had been too busy with a work crisis to follow up and eventually forgot about it. That code had been his finest work, but nobody knew he wrote it. Sometimes on cold nights behind the library, he would open his laptop and look at that forum post, reminding himself that he had once created something beautiful. The crowd's excitement was growing. James shouldered his bag of cans and started to turn away, but then stopped. His fingers touched the single quarter in his pocket, all he had left from yesterday. The same question that haunted him every day bubbled up again. What did he have left to lose? He looked down at his worn shoes, then at the shining Tesla showroom. The distance between them felt like 1,000,000 miles, but it was really just a few steps. His feet started moving before his brain could tell them to stop. The crowd parted unconsciously as he approached, people stepping away without even realizing they were doing it. James had become good at reading faces. He saw the usual mix of pity, disgust, and forced indifference. Finally, Musk turned back to James. "You said a dollar has 18 possible combinations of coins." He reached into his pocket, but sometimes the most interesting solutions aren't the obvious ones. Instead of pulling out any money, Musk held up his phone. On the screen was a forum post from 5 years ago showing a piece of code that James had written in his darkest hour, trying to prevent a disaster he could see coming. "I think," Musk said with a slight smile, "we need to have a longer conversation." The security team was already moving, creating a path toward the showroom's private entrance. James stood frozen, his bag of cans suddenly feeling very strange against his shoulder. "Coming?" Musk asked, already walking toward the door. James looked down at his worn shoes again, then at the shining showroom entrance. The distance still felt like 1,000,000 miles, but now, for the first time in years, it also felt possible to cross it. He took a step forward, then another. Behind him, he could hear the crowd murmuring, phones still recording, but for once, he didn't care about being seen. For the first time in 3 years, he felt like James Walker, software engineer again. And sometimes that's all it takes. One moment, one question, one chance to show that you're more than what the world sees on the surface. The showroom door opened and James Walker walked through it, they leaving behind a bag of cans and picking up something much more valuable: hope. The Tesla showroom's air conditioning hit James like a wave, making him suddenly aware of how long it had been since he'd been inside anywhere this nice. The floor gleamed like black ice, and the cars around him shone under perfect lighting. His reflection in their polished surfaces made him wince. Musk led the way past the main showroom into a back office. Security guards positioned themselves outside the door. An assistant quickly brought in 2 chairs and left, closing the door behind her. "Sit," Musk said, gesturing to one of the chairs while taking the other. He was still holding his phone, that mysterious forum post displayed on the screen. James sat carefully, trying not to dirty the pristine chair. His hands felt rough and out of place in this setting, like sandpaper on silk. The laptop pressed against his chest seemed to give him strength, a reminder that he still carried a piece of his old life with him. "Tell me about TechFront," Musk said, his eyes sharp and focused. "Not what's in the news. Tell me what really happened." James took a deep breath. He hadn't talked about this with anyone in years, not even the other homeless people who shared their stories around makeshift fires. "We were developing a new type of security protocol," he began, "something that could protect cryptocurrency transactions better than anything else out there. The basic idea was solid." He paused, old frustrations bubbling up. The management wanted it done faster than it should have been. They kept pushing for shortcuts. Musk nodded, saying nothing, just listening. It was strange how normal this felt, like any other technical discussion James had had in his previous life. "I saw the vulnerabilities," James continued. "Spent 3 days straight coding a solution. That's when I wrote that." He nodded toward Musk's phone. "Posted it, hoping someone smarter than me might improve it. But the next morning, before anyone could even look at it, the breach happened." "And they blamed you?" Musk said. It wasn't a question. James laughed bitterly. "They needed a scapegoat, senior engineer who'd been pushing back against management's decisions, perfect target." He looked down at his worn shoes. The lawyers took everything I had after that. Well, turns out it's a lot easier to become homeless than most people think. Musk was silent for a moment, scrolling through something on his phone. This code, he said finally, holding up the screen again. Did you know it was downloaded exactly once before the forum archived it? James shook his head. He'd never gone back to check. One download, Musk continued. Must have been by an automated system that archives potentially useful security protocols. He paused, letting that sink in. My automated system, Musk said. The words hit James like an electric shock. He sat up straighter, his mind racing. Your system. But why would Tesla's security team? Because we were developing our own cryptocurrency integration systems, Musk interrupted. And your code? Well, let's just say it solved some problems we hadn't even fully identified yet. James felt dizzy. His code, the last thing he'd written before his life fell apart, had actually been used by Tesla. But that's not really why I brought you in here, Musk said, setting his phone down. I wanted to ask you something else. He leaned forward slightly. What would you do with $1 million? The question hung in the air like smoke. James blinked, sure he had misheard. I'm sorry, what? $1 million, Musk repeated casually, as if he were asking about the weather. If I gave you $1 million right now, what would you do with it? James felt his throat go dry. $1 million, the amount that had seemed enormous in his old life, now felt almost incomprehensible. He could feel Musk watching him, waiting for his answer. His first thought was of Emma, his daughter. He could pay for her college, make up for all the birthdays he'd missed. He could get an apartment, clean clothes, a fresh start. But as these thoughts raced through his mind, something else emerged. Something that had been brewing in the back of his mind during those long nights in the library, coding on his stolen laptop. I wouldn't use it all, he heard himself saying, just enough to rent a small office and buy some equipment. His voice grew stronger as the idea took shape. There's a gap in the cybersecurity market. Everyone's focused on building walls, but they're not thinking about how those walls look to the people trying to break them. Musk's eyebrows rose slightly. Go on. I'd start a security consulting firm, James continued, the words flowing faster now, but different from the others. Instead of just testing systems, we'd think like the attackers, use their psychology against them, create security that adapts to human behavior patterns. He stopped suddenly, self-conscious. At least that's what I've been working on in the library when I can. Show me, Musk said, gesturing to James's laptop. James hesitated for a moment, then pulled out his battered laptop. It took 3 tries to boot up, the fan whirring loudly in the quiet office. He opened a folder of code he'd been working on, trying not to think about how he'd acquired the computer. It's not finished, he said apologetically, as Musk leaned in to look, and some of it might be outdated. I can only work on it when the library's open, and their internet isn't always. This is fascinating, Musk interrupted, scrolling through the code. You wrote all this on this laptop in a library? James nodded, watching Musk's face carefully. The billionaire's expression was unreadable as he continued examining the code. Finally, Musk sat back and looked at James with that same analytical gaze. From outside, you asked me for $1, he said slowly. But I think we both know that's not what you really need. James felt his heart start beating faster. What do you mean? Musk pulled out his phone again and made a quick call. Send in Vera with the paperwork, he said, then hung up. He turned back to James with a slight smile. I have another question for you, he said, and this one's more important than what you do with $1 million. The door opened, and a woman in a sharp business suit walked in, carrying a folder. James looked from her to Musk, confusion and hope battling in his mind. The question is, Musk said, taking the folder, what would you do with a second chance? James stared at the folder in Musk's hand, his mouth dry. A second chance? How many nights had he dreamed of those words while sleeping behind the library? But dreams were safe. Reality was much scarier. He started, then stopped. His fingers unconsciously moved to touch his laptop, his constant companion through the darkest times. I don't know if I deserve one. Musk's expression changed slightly, becoming more intense. Let me tell you what I see, he said, placing the folder on a small table between them. I see a senior engineer who spotted a security flaw, worked for 3 days straight to fix it, and then shared the solution freely instead of keeping it for himself. Someone who, even after losing everything, kept coding in a library on a borrowed laptop. James winced at the word borrowed, but Musk continued as if he hadn't noticed. When you asked me for $1, you didn't beg. You turned it into a problem to solve. That's not someone looking for handouts. That's an engineer's mind at work. He tapped the folder. So, I'm not asking if you deserve a chance. I'm asking what you would do with one. The air conditioning hummed softly as James gathered his thoughts. Through the office window, he could see people still gathered outside, phones pointed at the building. Just an hour ago, he had been out there with them, clutching a bag of cans. I'd start by proving you right, he said finally, his voice growing stronger. About seeing an engineer instead of just a homeless man. I'd show you that the code you found wasn't a one-time thing. Musk nodded, encouraging him to continue. The security system I've been designing, James continued, opening his laptop again. It's not just about stronger walls. It's about understanding why people try to break in the first place. His fingers flew across the keyboard, muscle memory taking over as he pulled up his project files. The laptop's fan whirred loudly, but he barely noticed. See, most security systems are binary. You're either in or out, but human behavior isn't binary. It's full of patterns, habits, unconscious decisions. He turned the screen toward Musk. This system learns from attack attempts. Each failure makes it stronger, like an immune system. Show me how it works, Musk said, leaning forward. For the next hour, James explained his ideas, drawing diagrams on scraps of paper, showing code snippets, describing the algorithms he developed during countless hours in the library. He forgot about his worn clothes, his unwashed hair, the years spent on the street. In that moment, he was just an engineer sharing his passion. Musk asked sharp questions, challenging assumptions, pointing out potential flaws, but instead of deflating James, each challenge energized him more. This was what he had missed most. Not the money or the comfort, but the intellectual sparring, the push to think deeper. Your core idea is solid, Musk said finally, after James had explained a particularly complex authentication system. But there's a bigger question here. He opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. How would you implement this across a network of millions of autonomous vehicles? James felt his heart skip a beat. You mean Tesla's network? Musk confirmed. Every car we make is essentially a computer on wheels, constantly exchanging data. Security isn't just about protecting money anymore. It's about protecting lives. The challenge in those words was clear. James looked down at his laptop, thinking about all the nights he'd spent coding, trying to stay connected to the world he'd lost. Had he been preparing for this moment without knowing it? I'd need to modify the core algorithms, he said slowly, his mind already racing through the possibilities. The basic principles would work, but the scale would be different, and the response time would need to be practically instant. He grabbed another piece of paper, sketching out a modified system architecture. Musk watched silently as James worked, occasionally nodding as new elements were added to the diagram. The biggest challenge would be managing the distributed nature of the network, James continued, barely aware he was thinking out loud. Each car would need to be both an independent security node and part of the larger system, like a neural network, but with real-time adaptation. He stopped suddenly, realizing he had filled several pages with diagrams and notes. The sun had moved noticeably through the window, and his throat was dry from talking. Sorry, he said, embarrassed by his enthusiasm. I got carried away. Musk picked up the pages, examining them carefully. Getting carried away is exactly what I was hoping for, he said. But ideas are easy. Implementation is hard. He put the papers down and fixed James with a steady gaze. Are you ready to prove these ideas can work? James felt a flutter of anxiety in his stomach. What do you mean? Musk pulled another document from the folder. I'm offering you a challenge. 5 hours, one computer, one complex security problem to solve. He paused, letting the words sink in. Show me that 3 years on the street haven't dulled your skills. The flutter in James' stomach turned into a full swarm of butterflies. 5 hours. One chance to prove himself. The stakes felt impossibly high. When? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., Musk handed him a card with an address. Everything you need will be provided. Just bring yourself and that mind that turned $1 into an algorithm. James looked at the card, then at his battered laptop. He started, then stopped. What could he say? This was more than a job opportunity. It was a chance to reclaim his life, to be the father Emma deserved, to prove that the past 3 years hadn't broken him. One more thing, Musk said, standing up. That security breach at TechFront, the one they blamed you for? He pulled up something on his phone. Our team did some digging. I think you'll want to see this. He handed James the phone. As James read the screen, his eyes widened. The truth he had tried to prove 3 years ago was right there in black and white. Keep the phone overnight, Musk said, walking to the door. Study the files. Tomorrow isn't just about coding. It's about justice. He opened the door, then turned back for one final look at James. Oh, and about that $1 you asked for? A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. Let's just say it's going to have a lot more zeros after it if you pass tomorrow's test. The door closed, leaving James alone in the quiet office. He looked down at the phone in his hands, then at the address card, then at his laptop. 3 years of struggling, of coding in libraries, of sleeping rough and collecting cans had led to this moment. Tomorrow would change everything. The only question was he ready? The sun was setting by the time James left the Tesla showroom. The crowd had dispersed, leaving only a few curious onlookers who barely glanced at him. In his pocket, Musk's phone felt impossibly heavy, like it contained the weight of his entire future. His feet carried him automatically toward the library. But then he stopped. The library would be closing soon, and for the first time in 3 years, he had somewhere else to go. The phone had come with another gift, a room at a nearby hotel for the night. Just focus on the challenge, Musk's assistant had told him, handing him the key card. Everything else is taken care of. Now, standing outside the hotel, James hesitated. Through the glass doors, he could see people in business suits walking across the polished lobby floor. 3 years ago, he wouldn't have thought twice about walking in. Now, he felt like an intruder. Sir, a young bellhop had noticed him hovering by the entrance. Can I help you? James pulled out the key card, half expecting to be challenged, but the bellhop just smiled and opened the door. Room 71112, sir. Elevators are to your right. The room was simple but clean, with a desk by the window overlooking the city. James stood in the doorway for a long moment, overwhelmed by the normalcy of it all. The made bed, the fresh towels, the silence that wasn't interrupted by street noise or other people's conversations. He placed his laptop on the desk and sat down, pulling out Musk's phone. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the files about TechFront. The truth he'd tried to prove for so long was all here. Internal emails showing management had been warned about security risks. Logs proving the breach had come from inside the company, evidence that he'd been set up to take the fall. 3 years, he whispered to the empty room. 3 years of living on the streets while the real culprits had walked free. He should have felt angry, but instead, he felt something else. Determination. Opening his laptop, he began reviewing his old code. The screen's glow filled the room as night fell over Austin, casting strange shadows on the walls. Hours passed as he worked, testing his memory, challenging himself with coding problems from online forums. Around midnight, his stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten all day. Room service was available, but the prices made him wince out of habit. Then he remembered this was covered too. He ordered a sandwich, and when it arrived, he almost cried at the simple pleasure of eating hot food at a proper desk. As he ate, he looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there was the library where he'd spent countless hours coding. Somewhere else was the alley where he slept, his few possessions hidden in a waterproof bag. Would he ever see those places again? His phone, his old phone, not Musk's, had died years ago, but he still carried it. Now he pulled it out and looked at the black screen, imagining it coming to life with a message from Emma. What would she think if she could see him now? "I'm gonna make it right, kiddo," he whispered. "I promise." He worked through the night, taking short breaks to shower, his first hot shower in months, and catch brief naps. The code flowed from his fingers like it had never left. Each line brought him closer to his old confidence. Around dawn, he found himself stuck on a particularly tricky algorithm. In the past, this would have been when he'd turned to his team for help. Now, alone in a hotel room, he felt the full weight of tomorrow's challenge. But was he really stuck? He looked at the problem again, remembering something he'd learned on the streets. Sometimes, when you have nothing, you see solutions that people with everything might miss. Living rough had taught him to think differently, to find paths others might overlook. He began typing again, implementing a solution that combined his old expertise with his new perspectives. The sun rose over Austin as he worked, painting the room in shades of gold. At 8:30 a.m., he finally stopped. His eyes were burning and his fingers ached, but his mind felt sharp. He had done everything he could to prepare. The rest would depend on whatever challenge Musk had prepared. He looked at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The hotel had provided a razor and clean clothes, simple jeans and a black t-shirt that actually fit. For the first time in years, he looked like the engineer he used to be. But he wasn't the same person. The man in the mirror had lived through failure and survival. He had kept coding, even when it seemed pointless. He had learned to see problems from angles his former self would never have considered. Maybe that was the point. Maybe he had needed to lose everything to become someone who could see what others missed. The address Musk had given him was a 15-minute walk away. As James left the hotel room, he took one last look at the desk where he'd worked through the night. Whatever happened today would change his life, either putting him back on his feet or sending him back to the streets. But somehow, that didn't seem as frightening as it had yesterday. He had survived 3 years of homelessness. He had kept coding when most people would have given up. He had faced down one of the world's richest men and turned a request for $1 into a conversation about algorithms. The morning air was cool as he stepped outside, his laptop under his arm. Ahead, the rising sun glinted off the windows of downtown Austin, turning them into mirrors of possibility. In a few hours, he would either have his second chance or be back on the streets. But for the first time in 3 years, James Walker walked with his head held high. He wasn't just a homeless man anymore, and he wasn't just the engineer he used to be. He was both, and maybe, just maybe, that made him exactly who he needed to be. The Tesla office building rose before him, all glass and steel, reaching into the Texas sky. A security guard at the front desk was already expecting him, checking his ID and handing him a visitor's badge without any of the suspicious looks James had grown used to receiving. 15th floor, the guard said. They're waiting for you. The elevator ride felt like traveling through time. Each floor that passed brought back memories of his days at TechFront. The morning meetings, the late-night coding sessions, the thrill of solving impossible problems. But now those memories were filtered through 3 years of hard-earned street wisdom. The elevator doors opened to a large, open-plan office. Rows of empty desks stretched out before him, each with a high-end computer setup. Standing in the middle of the room was Vera, Musk's assistant from yesterday, and 2 men he didn't recognize. "Right on time, Mr. Walker," Vera said, gesturing to a desk separated from the others. "Your workstation is ready." James approached the desk, taking in the 3 large monitors, the ergonomic chair, the fresh notepad and pens. Everything was perfectly arranged, waiting for him. His battered laptop suddenly felt out of place. "You won't need that today," one of the men said, noticing James clutching his laptop. "Everything you need is already set up." He extended his hand. "I'm David Jacob, head of Tesla's cybersecurity division." James shook his hand, trying to keep his own from trembling. The other man introduced himself as Mike Torres, senior security architect. "Before we begin," David said, "Mr. Musk wanted you to see something." He pressed a button on a remote and a large screen on the wall came to life. It showed a live feed of what looked like a massive server room. "This is the heart of Tesla's autonomous vehicle network," David explained. "Every car we make connects to these servers. The security challenge you'll face today isn't theoretical. It's about protecting real people in real cars." James felt his mouth go dry. The scale of what he was seeing was enormous. "Your challenge," Mike continued, "is to find a way in." James turned to him, confused. "You want me to hack it?" Vera stepped forward with a tablet. "We've created a sealed testing environment that mirrors our actual system. Your job is to break in and then show us how to stop someone like you from doing it again. 5 hours. One chance. James sat down at the workstation, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. The screens came to life with lines of code, system architectures, security protocols. Your time starts now, David said, starting a large digital clock on the wall. Good luck. The first hour was just exploration. James dove into the code, mapping out the system's architecture in his mind. It was beautiful work, elegant, efficient, clearly designed by brilliant engineers. But as he went deeper, he started to see things differently. 3 years of homelessness had taught him to look for the gaps, the overlooked spaces where survival was possible. In the library, he'd read about every major security breach he could find, understanding not just the technical details, but the human patterns behind them. By the second hour, he had found his first potential entry point. Not in the obvious places where security would be strongest, but in the seemingly innocent interactions between subsystems. He began writing test code, probing gently like a locksmith feeling for pins. Interesting approach, he heard Mike murmur to David. They were watching his screens from a distance, taking notes. The third hour brought his first major breakthrough. James had found a way to make two perfectly secure systems interact in a way their designers hadn't anticipated. It wasn't enough to break in, but it was a start. His fingers flew over the keyboard, mind fully engaged in the puzzle before him. This wasn't just about proving himself anymore. It was about solving a problem that mattered, about protecting people who would trust their lives to these cars. Halfway through the fourth hour, everything clicked. James sat back, staring at his screens in a mixture of awe and concern. He had found it, a path through Tesla's defenses that no one had seen before. But more importantly, he knew how to fix it. "I'm ready," he said quietly. David, Mike, and Vera gathered around his desk as James walked them through his discovery. He showed them the vulnerability he'd found, then revealed the solution he'd developed, a security system that didn't just patch the hole but turned it into a trap for future attackers. David started, then stopped, looking at his notes. "This shouldn't be possible in the time you had." "Living on the streets," James said, his voice steady. "You learn to see things differently. Security isn't just about strong walls. It's about understanding how people think when they have nothing to lose." The clock on the wall showed 15 minutes remaining when James finished his presentation. The room was silent except for the hum of computers. "One last question," Mike said, studying James carefully. "Why did you do it this way?" He pointed to a particular section of James's code. There were more obvious solutions. James thought about the nights behind the library, the days collecting cans, the hours coding on his borrowed laptop. "Because the obvious path is the first place people look," he said. "True security comes from understanding that everyone has a story, a reason for what they do. If you want to stop someone from breaking in, you have to understand why they're trying in the first place." David and Mike exchanged looks. Vera was already on her phone, speaking quietly to someone. "Well," David said finally, "I think we've seen everything we need to." The elevator doors opened, cutting him off. Elon Musk walked out, holding a familiar-looking folder. "Show me," he said simply, pulling up a chair to James's desk. James turned back to his screens, heart pounding. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd survived, had led to this moment. He took a deep breath and began to explain. For the next 20 minutes, James walked Musk through his solution. He explained how he'd found the vulnerability, demonstrated his unique approach to fixing it, and showed how his system could adapt to future threats. With each explanation, he felt more like his old self, confident, capable, alive. Musk remained silent throughout the presentation, his expression unreadable. When James finished, the room was so quiet he could hear the hum of the computers around them. "That forum post from 5 years ago," Musk said finally, opening the folder he'd brought with him. "The one that saved Tesla millions in potential security breaches." He pulled out a printed page that James recognized, his anonymous post from that fateful night at TechFront. "I've had teams trying to find the author for years," Musk continued. "The code was brilliant, but more than that, it showed a way of thinking that we needed. Someone who could see problems differently." He looked up at James, someone who understood that security isn't just about technology, it's about people. James felt his heart skip a beat. You knew, he whispered. When I asked you for that dollar, you already knew who I was. Musk shook his head, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Not at first, but when you started talking about combinations and problem solving, something clicked. The way you think, he tapped the printed code. It matched this perfectly. But then why? James started, confused. Why the test? Why not just tell me? Because I needed to know if you could still do it, Musk replied. 3 years is a long time, but more than that. He gestured to the screens showing James's work. I needed to see if those years had taught you something even more valuable. David stepped forward, pointing to a specific section of James's code. This part here, treating potential breaches as learning opportunities rather than just threats. That's not something we've seen before. You can't learn that in a classroom, James said quietly. Sometimes you have to lose everything to understand how people think when they're desperate. Musk nodded, then pulled another document from his folder. Which brings us to TechFront. He handed the paper to James. This was filed with the SEC this morning, the real story of what happened 3 years ago. James's hands trembled as he read. The evidence was all there. Proof that management had ignored his warnings, that they'd known about the vulnerabilities and covered them up, that they deliberately set him up to take the fall. How did you? He started, but Musk cut him off. Let's just say Tesla's legal team is very thorough when we're looking to hire someone. He paused, letting that sink in. The truth is going public. TechFront's board is facing criminal charges, and there will be a very public apology to you. James felt dizzy. After 3 years of carrying the weight of false accusations, of trying to prove his innocence, it was finally happening. But that's not why you're here, Musk continued. He pulled out one final document. You're here because Tesla needs someone who understands both C code and human nature, someone who can see security from all angles. He slid the paper across the desk. We need a head of adaptive security systems. James stared at the job offer. The salary made his head spin, more money than he'd ever made at TechFront. But it was the title that caught his eye. This wasn't just a job. It was a chance to turn everything he'd learned, both before and after his fall, into something meaningful. There's one condition, Musk added. That laptop you've been carrying around, the one you've been using at the library. He held James's gaze. I know it's stolen. James felt his face burn with shame, but Musk wasn't finished. Part of your signing bonus will be a donation to that coffee shop, enough to buy new laptops for every employee. Sometimes the best way to fix a wrong is to turn it into something right. Tears blurred James's vision as he nodded. I never wanted to steal, he whispered. I just needed to keep coding to prove I could still... I know, Musk said simply. That's exactly why you're the right person for this job. James looked around the room at David and Mike's encouraging smiles, at Vera's quiet approval at the screens showing his work. Then he looked down at his hands, the same hands that had collected cans and coded in libraries, and now had a chance to build something that mattered. When do I start? He asked, his voice steady. Right now, Musk replied, standing up. But first, there's someone who wants to talk to you. He handed James a phone, not the one from last night, but a new one. On the screen was a text message from an unknown number. Dad, is it really you? Mom showed me the news about TechFront. James's hands shook as he read his daughter's message. Somehow, in the space of 24 hours, his entire world had shifted. One more thing, Musk said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a single dollar bill and placed it on the desk. You asked me for this yesterday, but I think we both know it was never about the money. James picked up the dollar, remembering how desperate he'd felt just yesterday morning. On the bill, Musk had written a simple message, sometimes the best investments aren't measured in dollars. As he sat there holding the dollar in one hand and his daughter's message in the other, James finally understood. His 3 years on the street hadn't been a fall from grace. They had been a painful, necessary education in human nature. Every can collected, every night behind the library, every line of code written on a stolen laptop had led him here. He had asked for $1 but found something far more valuable, a chance to use everything he'd learned, both the triumphs and the failures, to make a difference. Welcome to tech, Mr. Walker, Musk said, extending his hand. Let's change the world. James stood up, straightened his shoulders, and shook the offered hand. He wasn't just James Walker, former engineer, or James, the homeless man. He was both, and together those experiences made him exactly who he needed to be. The dollar bill would later be framed on his office wall, a reminder that sometimes the smallest requests can lead to the biggest changes. And beneath it, he would place a single can, the last one he ever collected, as a reminder that rock bottom isn't an ending. Sometimes it's just the foundation for building something extraordinary. And there you have it, friends, a powerful reminder that sometimes the smallest moments can change everything. I'd love to know which part of this story touched your heart the most and where you're listening from. Drop your location in the comments below. If this story about second chances and hidden potential moved you, consider sharing it with someone who might need a little hope today. Remember, we never know someone's full story just by looking at them. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of second chances, and subscribe to join our community of storytellers spreading kindness one tale at a time. Turn on notifications to catch more stories that remind us of the extraordinary possibilities in ordinary moments. Until next time, keep believing in second chances and never judge a book by its cover. Sometimes the most remarkable stories come from the most unexpected places. Thank you for being part of this journey. Where will kindness take us next? Only you can help us find out. Stay kind, stay hopeful, and we'll see you in the next story.